And baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, the Toronto FC fan show. Happy Canada Day long weekend for those who are listening here in the Great White North, and happy early 4th of July to our American friends who are listening. For the podcast listeners, we are hosting this on July the 3rd, so happy July 4th if you are listening to this on the Tuesday. Not a happy Canada Day for your Reds as they drop another heartbreaker in stoppage time to RSL this past weekend. On this week's show, we're going to quickly recap Toronto FC's Canada Day loss to RSL and sort of rate interim manager Terry Dunfield's debut at BMO Field. We're going to talk about Bill Manning's interesting press conference from earlier in the week. Mike Singh, you were there live, so we'll love to get your takes. And of course, we'll get to your comments from this week's burning question presented by Nextdoor. And we will also name our Federico Bernardeschi shirt winner. We do have a winner, so we're really excited about that. Before we get into the show, we do have a new YouTube channel. So please like the video when it gets posted and subscribe to the new link. It is at youtube.com/@TTID podcast. Go ahead, hit that link. I think we'll throw it into the chat at some point tonight. And hit the bell for notifications to ensure you won't miss any of the future episodes. We will repeat that before the show is out. But lots to dig into. Let's get into it. Mike Singh, Jeffrey P. Nesker, as always. Gents, how you doing? How is your Canada Day long weekend?
Mikey? You want me to go first?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I just got back from 4.5 miles. I don't even remember what direction it is. It's by the Ottawa Valley. I was in Pembroke, so I'm sort of unstuck in time right now. My weekend is not over yet, boys. And certainly, I want to preface this by offering my heartfelt congratulations to Eric Giacometti. This will be the beginning of his last week, if we're to believe the tweet at TFC as the social director. Don't know if it's going to be his last week in Toronto. Certainly indicated such in the tweet. He's saying goodbye to the club and the city. Thank you, Eric, for all that you've done for the club, for us, over this last little spell. Thank you for helping TFC through some difficult times during the pandemic. And I wish you only the best in your future endeavors, my man. Honestly, absolute legend.
Absolutely. We might have a special guest joining us next week, so put that feather in a cap. But Mike Singh, how was your weekend?
Yeah, long, obviously, with everything going on in Canadian soccer. I mean, it wasn't a great weekend for maybe even Toronto sports in general, if you could count the Raptors losing. Shout out Fred VanVleet. Least free agency. I know it got a little bit better the past couple days, but it wasn't looking too great early on. And obviously with TFC losing, just such a heartbreaker, which we'll get into more, and Canadian men's national team is struggling to put the ball in the back of the net against, inferior opposition. Vibes weren't great, but personally, it's a long weekend. Canada Day weekend. Had a fantastic weekend. Aside from obviously soccer side of things.
Yeah, for sure. And I just got sick over the weekend, so I'm really just getting over the air conditioner cold. If for those in Canada get that a lot as it gets hot here in Ontario. I tend to get it every year, so I'm just battling through that right now. But yeah, no, not a great weekend for Canadian soccer. Starts off with potential bankruptcy with the Canadian national program, which Jason DeVos has walked back in subsequent interviews, and then of course you draw against Guadalupe, and then you draw again against Guatemala. And now you're having to, beat Cuba by quite a bit to get through to the next round of the Gold Cup, though it's pretty doable. And then, of course, we get to our Reds. Let's talk about, gentlemen, RSL 1, Toronto FC 0. An interesting just an interesting Canada Day game at BMO Field. I was sick, so I could not go. Jeff, I think you were there. Mike, I
Nope.
think you were there as well. Nope, no, yes, right, you were in Pembroke.
Nope.
Mike, you were there. Look, it started off with potential protests by supporters. At least that's how the plan looked like it was going into that, and then sort of things changed last minute, and things were good, but you still saw banners following the sack. It's the first home game following the sacking of Bob Bradley, and some discontent was definitely on display at BMO Field. But Mike, you were there at the stadium. Give us your overall thoughts and sort of vibe on the match itself.
Yeah, before we do that, I'd love to get some more insight into the protests. What was the protest supposed to be about? What happened from your perspective? What changed? And then what sort of things did you see still from, I guess, a protest perspective?
Yeah, look, I think generally this was going to be a protest about the state of the club currently. Definitely a protest around management. This goes beyond Bob Bradley. I think Bob Bradley, for a lot of people, is the first domino. And I'll get to that a little bit later because I have some personal views that I think I'm going to just sort of lay out here on the show. But, to be brief in that regard, I think there's a lot of discontent amongst the supporter base around just the overall sort of strategic vision of this club going forward. And specifically, a lot of that is directed at Bill Manning. Let's not sort of beat around the bush. Definitely it was directed towards the president of Toronto FC. There was a banner outside of in Liberty Village and then eventually outside Gate 3B where a lot of the supporters enter the stadium, talking about who's next to fall on the sword. And really just sort of the overall vibe before. I mean, things got sorted out. I won't get into the details around that. But, I think in the end of the day, this is not the end. I don't think. I think a lot of people are starting to feel a lot of what we talked about last week in terms of, Bob Bradley being sacked. Like, it wasn't just the manager. Of course, the manager is a part of that. And obviously he's a sporting director as well. But I think there is a overall feeling that something is not right at Toronto FC. And it's not just this season. That it's been going on for a while, and there's a constant through that. And obviously, look, fans can't see behind the door; they don't see what happens behind the curtain. But a lot of people feel like there's moth holes in the curtain, and they can kind of peek through and see little shafts of light, and they don't like what they're seeing. So I think that's where the protests really stem from, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's more. Because I think it goes beyond just results, and I'll sort of save it for later. But that's generally my
I mean,
speaking
of peeking through, like the whole inkling of protest to me started with, I mean, who's responsible for that screen cap about the sanctions against Section 114? Because it was shared around, it was like mouse sized, and I'm getting older, so I couldn't read it. People kept sharing that screen cap, and I'm like, I'm sorry that happened, but whatever. I'm not even going to try doing that. It's interesting, I wasn't there for this game. So naturally I didn't expect, even in the so-called extended highlights, bandied on my OTT, that I would even get any of that sort of thing. So I'm pleased we're discussing it, because I don't know if anything happened. You know what I mean? Did anything end up happening? I know it was supposed to be silent, and then it wasn't silent, and then et cetera.
So I think a lot of the supporter groups didn't put up their banners, although they chanted. I think there was, in some cases, less of a presence from that perspective. That said, a lot of people didn't wear gear, more neutral colors in the stands. Some that got the message did, some that didn't. That was fine. I mean, look, everybody has the right to express their support in their own way. And 100%. I think that's important to keep in mind. But I do think there is a element of, I don't know if toxicity is the right word, but there is a bit of that kind of tangible, just there's a lot of anger right now in a lot of different directions.
For sure.
It's hard to sort of synthesize it in a very short period of time. But I think that, to answer your question, Mike, and to sort of also answer your question, Jeff, I think there is a sense right now that, things could bubble over a bit. in terms of support, and it's extending beyond just supporter groups. Like, obviously I'm talking supporter groups just because this was a South End action, but I think there's more, as you talk to people within the fan base that are not affiliated with any supporter group or don't even sit in the South End. Like, I think it's seeping in now. It's seeping in beyond that. And I think there's some people who are asking some questions about what's going on at this club. Mike, I don't know if you kind of felt that either through Terry Dunfield's post-game press conference or throughout the week, or even in the stadium as you were sort of
just looking out the
game,
window.
But
you're saying people were wearing less gear. Was it discernible from your perch up in the heavens?
To be honest, not entirely.
Okay. That's fair.
Had I not been wary of some of the things that were going to be going on and some of the things that were planned ahead of time, and obviously plans changed, I probably wouldn't have paid too much attention to it, but I did. And I did keep an eye, and I did notice that, I think aside from U sector, there is no banners along the railings, which there typically are. I went down actually before the national anthems, and even during the national anthems, just to get a sense of what the vibe was. Obviously, it's Canada Day.
Of course.
It's supposed to be a new era at the club. I was curious, right? Just to see from the people's perspective there in the stands, just to see kind of what the energy levels were like. And I have to say, like, before kickoff, it was pretty high, pretty good. Obviously, players were cheered for. This protest, as Mike illustrated, wouldn't have been towards the players themselves, more so against upper management. I find it really interesting that it's gone this direction, the protest direction, in the first game post Bob Bradley era. Just because you figure that obviously everyone was calling for Bob Bradley's head. You got Bob Bradley's head, and you figured, maybe that would buy the club some more time, buy some patience from the fan base. But obviously, I think I love it, because I think the fans have a really good perspective and supporters have a really good perspective. Look, no one knows.
There's a sophistication,
Exactly. No one knows this club more than the South End people and South End fans. And so to see that, I think it's a really strong message, and I hope that if some action does decide to be taken by the fan base, I hope it's next time it's there's some more unity behind it and it's clear, because I think that obviously the fans have all the power in the world to kind of make a difference, and let their message be heard. So we'll see exactly what comes of it. Like I said, the vibe, I thought pregame was pretty good. Wasn't a sold out Canada Day, surprisingly. Actually, obviously a lot of different events going on in the city. There was the Blue Jays game at 3:00, so I was a little bit surprised on that perspective, but maybe that just again speaks volumes to where the club is at. And I guess from a bigger perspective, from the city perspective, not just from, the diehard soccer fans perspective, because it was a gorgeous day and it could have made for a special night at BMO Field. So yeah, the vibes were, it was solid. It was fine. But obviously with the match ended the way it did, some booze at the end too. So it wasn't a memorable day, I guess, put it that way.
Yeah. It's funny. I can't. Oh, sorry.
No, Jeff, go ahead.
Well, no, it's a total non sequitur, but we can't. I've had this written down. Like, speaking of the South End, I just don't know where to jam this in, but I feel like I can't not say it. Alicia and I were at the Canadian men's national team game on the Tuesday. And shout out, it was the first time I've seen they've pulled up the whole bench side of BMO to allow for what will, I assume, be the World Cup renovations, but. My tickets weren't V tickets. They were, that was the initial public offering from TFC. I bought tickets in 116 where I usually sit. We were further up, but no one was standing. I mean, it was, the crowd mentality. It was a lot more posh. I haven't seen the South End like that, I don't think, ever, where the crowd temptation was to sit and we were the jerks for sort of standing. So it was like a complete flip. And I don't really know how to contextualize. I don't really have a point beyond just mentioning that, maybe you want to say it speaks to the sort of disassociation going on with soccer in the city as a whole right now. I don't know if I'd be willing to make that argument. It's just a little fun fact that I wanted to throw out in my usual way of derailing conversations on this show. So just pretend it never happened, and
Well,
there we go.
Canada was booed.
Mhm.
Canada was booed off the pitch there too when they
Yeah.
conceded late. Were they
Yeah,
not?
and
Yeah.
Jeff, just to give you some context there, so before we get it back into the game here, just the V's, the way it works generally is the supporter section actually only extends to about maybe 113, maybe 114
Oh yeah,
at
and
most.
you know, yeah,
And then after that, like generally, it's been traditionally that has been a sitting section, even in the south
Right.
end of BMO Field. Now, obviously, the World Cup run changed a lot of that because a lot more people were
Right.
coming and sort of understood what the
Mhm.
sort of role was. But for things like Nations League, for things like the Gold Cup, like it's generally going to be that way.
Yeah. And also I'm bearing the lead. We all know that, the V's dealing with CONCACAF is one of their least favorite things to do, et cetera, ad infinitum. But at the end of the day, there's still the dichotomy of sitting there where within earshot, the sign says this is a supporter standing room section, and the zeitgeist is completely changed by nature of just how many, the scales tipping from seating people to standing people. It's just fun watching crowd mentality happen like that. And again, I don't have an answer to the point. I just felt that this was a good enough place to sort of jam it in there, Jeffy
For
style.
sure.
So
For sure.
Yeah.
Just getting back into the game itself, a back and forth game in a lot of ways. It felt like basketball at times, where it felt like both teams for a while were trading opportunities, and definitely a sloppy game. A lot of turnovers, a lot of transition opportunities. You could say that RSL shaded this a little bit. I think if it came away with a draw, I think that would have been fair enough for TFC, especially given sort of the second half performance. Interesting sort of note, just watching it and listening to commentary. And I listened to this on Apple, not on TSN, because I want to get a little bit of a different perspective. It's actually the guys who normally call the Vancouver Whitecaps games, which was interesting. But the thing that sort of stood out to me, two things. One, I do think that there was a concerted effort to get the ball to Lorenzo Insigne in the first half to get him opportunities to get onto the ball, and I thought he still looked a bit lively. That said, obviously he pulls up injured before halftime. There are some people who have reached out to me. I'm sure there's people who have reached out to you guys who are doubting the veracity or how injured he really is. But be that as it may, the information we know right now is that he has some type of knock. He's questionable to go to Orlando tomorrow. Usually, if my understanding is, if they're questionable, they don't travel. So most likely, we don't have Lorenzo Insigne tomorrow.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay, fair enough. But generally, when they're questionable, my understanding is they don't travel with the team. But possible he does. I guess from this perspective, how deflating is it to sort of finally get Lorenzo Insigne kind of going now, not maybe top form, but start to get some fiddle from him, and then have this sort of knock him back again potentially? You almost felt it in the crowd once they announced Shaquille Marshall-Ruddy coming in the second half. Was just like, oh, you got to be kidding me again.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? I agree with you. I thought at first half he was really good. TFC's best player. Him and Raul Petretta were forming a pretty nice relationship down that left-hand side. I actually thought that they were playing so heavy down the left-hand side that they weren't utilizing or getting the best out of Federico Bernardeschi on the right-hand side. And in the second half, when Insigne went off, they were using Bernardeschi more, and he got more into the game, obviously. So I thought that was at least noteworthy. Positive, like you said, some positive news from Terry Dunfield. We spoke to him on a conference call this afternoon, and he said the team got a positive update about Lorenzo Insigne. It wasn't as serious as they might have thought it would have been initially. All he would say was just a lower body injury, and that Insigne wants to play tomorrow, and right now he's just going to be listed as questionable. So yeah, we'll see exactly what his status is, but definitely deflating, especially because it's Terry Dunfield's debut. It's supposed to be the start of, like I said, like a new era here. And then it's still more of the same. And that obviously we'll get to the result in a little bit. But I feel like Terry Dunfield got a little bit of a taste of what Bob Bradley has kind of dealt with throughout this whole
Mm-hmm.
stretch of, players getting in and out of the lineup, key players going down, not having your full lineup. So I thought that was interesting. Curious actually just to get your guys' thoughts on
Mm.
Terry going with a 4-4-2 with Kosi Thompson as this kind of
Yeah.
secondary striker there. What were your guys' thoughts on that?
Jeff, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, regardless of where he put Kosi, I think the 4-4-2 we've been screaming for it. With all of the, when you part ways with a coach as pragmatic or as stubborn, a word escapes me, but somebody so a dead set on the 4-3-3, I think the obvious answer was to try these players out in something a little bit more proven, a little bit less advanced level tactics. So, I said it in my own answer to our burning question, which is, I think he set them up the way that 90% of us would have had we been given the keys in this first game. Um, you know, he certainly allowed them freedom, as evidenced by Ame Mabika, playing second striker and leading the attack for at least 2 or 3 different phases. Whether the whole team played as free as I would have expected in that sort of new coach bump first Terry match, I don't know. Is it a Bob Bradley hangover? Is it what Mike was insinuating, that there are deeper, more pervasive issues at this club, that it doesn't matter who's calling the shots and who's making the subs? Um, Conceding a goal late isn't a Terry Dunfield problem. It's a TFC problem. A lot of people, I think, a couple weeks ago would have said it was a Bob Bradley problem, but I think now we can say with some assurance that this team has a problem. They fall asleep. When you look at that second goal, you've got half of TFC zonal marking the 18-yard box on the other side of the action. But there is a lot of sleeping on plays and ball watching going on, especially at the last minute. It all revolves around this team's, perceived inability to play out games and hold on to leads. So yeah, it's disappointing because the expectation is it's all going to turn around in one game, and kumbaya, and Terry's going to lead us into the promised land. But at the end of the day, I was happy. I was happy with the performance. But I think, what cost us the points is the same old, same old.
Yeah, it's interesting. Was not expecting a 4-4-2, to be perfectly honest.
Really?
I thought a 4-2-3-1 might be where we went. And I kind of saw it at that way initially, until obviously I started watching them play and I realized that Kosi was essentially playing as a second striker, which is interesting because Kosi got his debut in the academy with TFC 3, I believe, under Terry Dunfield. So he knows the player really well.
That's a fun fact.
Yeah, a lot of these young players that are coming through the academy, actually, Terry Dunfield has sort of had his fingerprints on their sort of footballing DNA through the academy, so he knows a lot of these guys, including Lazar Stefanovic, who, congratulations, 16 years old, gets his debut for the senior team in the second half, and looked decent in getting sort of thrown right into the fire. But to answer your question, Michael, I thought if you're going to go with a 4-4-2, I think you use Federico Bernardeschi as that second striker or Lorenzo Insigne as that second striker. We had talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I think, Jeff, you actually brought it up, whether using them either as a false nine or as a second striker. And I think Chris Fung actually a couple months ago brought it up as well.
Yeah,
I'm fine with it. I mean, obviously, let's see how it goes. I don't know. I think it kind of at times may leave you defensively stretched. As evidenced by sort of the back and forth nature at times during this game. Now, I think that's partly because it's a new manager putting in sort of a bit of a new system and people getting used to slightly new roles. Also, it's down to how RSL plays as well. But I think, like I said, I think there are bigger structural. I think there are not even structural. I think there are bigger issues with just overall talent on the team right now, and I think that speaks to a lot of the dysfunction in terms of how this team sometimes plays. And look, I think the final goal there, you were mentioning it, Jeff, that yes, there was a little bit of falling asleep, but also it's a bit unlucky, right? Like you get a deflection that goes off Kobe Franklin, who by the way, I thought Kobe Franklin was the star of the game. a deflection off him. Greg Rensing has to make a save. Some people said maybe it would have been going wide anyway. As a goalkeeper, you have to make a play on that. You can't just leave.
You have to commit 100%.
Yeah, and at that point, it's sort of just who reacts first, and it just was RSL reacting first. In some ways, yes, you can sort of put your hand up and say that there's blame around there. But sometimes just when you're in a rut, bounces don't go your way. Sometimes you have to earn some of those bounces. And look, there are plenty of opportunities for TFC to score. I mean, Brendan Cervini puts one off the crossbar.
Yeah,
they had opportunities. CJ Sapong whistles ones over the crossbar. They created chances in that second half, and for the first time, really, they looked dangerous in transition in the second half on Saturday. You haven't been able to say that about TFC in quite a while. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, if I can be brutally honest, I thought I really felt like the game I was watching another game under Bob Bradley. And maybe that's a little bit unfair to Terry because he's only had 4 days to kind of implement his system. So maybe that's not a surprise. But it wasn't until the game opened up midway through the second half. And you could, TFC, sure, they took off the reins a little bit, but so did RSL because, quite frankly, both teams felt that 3 points was within reach.
There for the team.
RSL also missed a lot of chances, and I would say RSL were probably the better team throughout the game. But I still for a team that boasts the two Italians, some really solid central midfielders, they don't play a really attractive brand of football. And I really felt like, especially in that first half, it looked like it was going to go. I mean, it was a minute away, I guess, from going to another scoreless 0-0 game. And that's kind of what I saw play out once again. I really do feel like this team is struggling to they get themselves in good areas. They find advantages at times, but just that next bit of movement, this team is struggling to kind of put that together and create really clear-cut kind of opportunities and intentional opportunities and even unintentional opportunities at times. It does feel like a lot of their players are isolated a little bit too much, too many times. And I don't know what really the solution is for unlocking more. And maybe it's a personnel issue, but yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I said so much, regardless of how you feel on his tactics, I'm prepared to allow the Bob Bradley hangover. The players were struggling to know where to go under his system. And now, like you're saying, it feels like, unfortunately, there's a lot left of his system left in the players that they now need to get rid of. So, it's a Bob, I'm prepared to say a Bob Bradley hangover, but mostly, this idea of, the bright spot for Lorenzo and Fede, right? Do you guys like cricket? Do you ever watch cricket?
Well,
yeah. So, one of the things that I love about cricket are those 5-day test matches, right? Where when you award a winner, you can be pretty sure that the right team won. Because at this point, you've now, every batter's faced every bowler, every fielder's had an opportunity at every spot. You know what I mean? Twice, exactly. So when the match is awarded, you've crossed off almost every variable. And I think the frustration with Berna and Fede is this unwillingness to sort of apply moving them around the pitch as a test cricket match, right? It's obviously not working. So I don't understand the reluctance and even if you were to argue that it's working, I don't think anybody would say it can't, there's no room for improvement. So why aren't we trying everywhere? Did you play left back in high school? Let's try Lorenzo at left back. At the end of the day, it feels like, but it does. It feels like this disconnect between everybody and their mother knows that there's room for improvement, and the easiest first step would be, hey, if we're doing a 4-4-2, let's try you both at striker. You know what I mean? Or at least one of you at striker. So it's madness when that doesn't happen. It's maddening when that doesn't happen.
That's fair.
Because why should that still be a question we have to ask? We should have answered that question a long, long time ago.
I was a little bit surprised to see both Insigne and Bernardeschi on the wings once again.
I did.
I was a little bit surprised. I thought even maybe throughout the course of the match that at a certain point when things are still kind of at 0-0 and you're not really creating too many chances, that you'd see, kind of Bernardeschi get pushed through the middle, play as a 10, like we've seen instances of, and we've seen positive instances of
Mm-hmm.
that happening. But obviously, you're still kind of feeling things out as the new manager, and their go-to spots are left wing and right wing, and maybe some other changes around them would help them succeed. I think that's what you want to try out first, is my thought process, I guess, behind it, to kind of justify the decision. I actually, I didn't, I didn't, I was surprised that, one of DeAndre or Iowakinola didn't start as that second striker if you're going to keep the Italians on the wings. I was surprised
Mm-hmm.
that Kosi got the call. They're actually ahead of those guys. Just because obviously those guys have played that position before and they're natural strikers, whereas Kosi, well, yeah, sure, through the academy he's played that position. We haven't seen him play that position at this level yet.
Yeah.
And I don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily think it was a success at this trial run or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, really interested to see how Terry decides to line up tomorrow. I'm with you, Mike. I give another shout out to Lazar, 16 years
Mm-hmm.
old, came on. Man, like he didn't look too far out of place, and I'm
No.
surprised because that's the toughest position to come in as is a 16-year-old, middle of the game center back.
Yeah.
And like I said, positionally
Yeah.
he was sound. He read the game really well. Obviously, there was that one instance where he
Yeah,
kind of
whiff.
gave the ball away, but like overall, like I love the fact that Terry Dunfield was willing to be. I think that is Terry Dunfield. That's the epitome of who he is. I think he's a manager that would try to integrate all these academy kids that he's had a hand in kind of developing here at Toronto, and he's going to try and integrate them into the squad. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I think you answered your own question. That's why Terry started Kosi. And if it had worked, can you imagine the brownie points and ego boost they both would have gained? Terry figuring out, at least for a game, the number 9 position by going into his member berries and putting Kosi up there in the same way that he gave Lazar his start, and for the most part it worked. That's awesome. I forgot my second train of thought there, but
Yeah,
to
no
me,
worries.
you just answered your own question with respect to why Kosi started up there.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, and maybe we'll wrap up with this before we get to Bill Manning's press
Oh,
conference.
I remembered my second
Yeah.
point. Sorry. It speaks volumes about Iowakinola State at the club, I think. The fact that he didn't see any minutes.
I actually thought he looked pretty good when he did come on. I thought he actually looked.
My problem still is
yeah.
that he couldn't hold the ball up.
Yeah,
in key
I'm
moments.
done. I'm done. He always looks pretty good. The problem
Yeah,
is
I'm not.
that's
I'm
how he
not
gets
done with
you.
him, but
Mm.
I think there were key times where he needed to hold the ball when the ball was played to him, and he just couldn't hold it up, and it let RSL sort of get on us in the final 10 minutes. It's moments. I don't. We'll see under Terry what that looks like. Maybe he will get a chance on Tuesday against Orlando. It will be very interesting to see. The thing is that game opened up. Coelho came in. He
What a
used all 5
baller, by the
subs,
way.
which
What a baller. I love him.
yeah, I mean, he looked really good again. And look, I think that, and again, nature of the game. So that this is just sort of a single game state because this game was a little wild, and it got a little wild at a certain point. But you were talking on the broadcast, like TFC used the second fewest subs in all of Major League Soccer. I think only Adrian Heath at Minnesota uses less.
Yikes.
And this was the first time I think we had gone in and used all 5 subs, or maybe only the second time all season we've gone and used all 5 subs, and fairly early into the second half too. All 5 subs were used. So from that perspective, it'll be interesting to see what sort of the plan and sort of what the mandate from Terry really is, from Bill Manning and from management at this point, because I don't know if it's playoffs. Like I really don't know if it's playoffs, because if you think about it, this team's 7 points out and there's like 6 teams to climb. Mathematically, of course, it's still possible. Anything can happen. It's Major League Soccer in the second half of the season, especially with the Leagues Cup coming up. But it really does feel like this is an insurmountable mountain. Like last year, we were saying, okay, you get these guys in at the transfer window, and then you see what happens, and then maybe they make a run, and then they start to make a run, and then it fell apart. I don't feel like that's coming this year. Go ahead, Jeff.
Can I be honest? I don't want playoffs. I'm going to be completely honest. This team needs a longer offseason to figure its stuff out. In the way that the surprise 2019 MLS Cup run kind of put the kibosh on fixing the mistakes that we made in 2018 because we got too big for our britches. You know, I maintain this. Like, we should have kept on to the Beta Shores. We didn't need the Agar-Ketches, and we certainly didn't need the Gregory Vanderveels, but we saw the shiny, and we had just won the treble, and it was a rookie mistake. And then, you know, 2019 kind of reset that because we went on this miraculous run to MLS Cup. I know how disastrous 3 years of no playoffs is going to be to this franchise, and as much as I hate being around to witness and report on it, I think this team, one, deserves it, and B, low-key needs it. Because, I mean, our last episode, Mike, you know, you were so prescient about it when you talked about how Bob Bradley was hired and they paid him a 5-year deal and they said, let's do a rebuild. And then they lost their nerve and suddenly and I'm not even talking about signing in Singh ahead of bringing him in. I'm talking about suddenly going, oh my God, the pressure is mounting. We need to do this rebuild now, which is counter to the money they outlaid for a rebuild. You know what I mean? This club isn't very good at doing things quickly. So the more things that we take off the docket so that it can focus on what it needs to fix as opposed to false dawn here, false dawn there, this false dawn. You know, do I need another capitulation in Nashville in the first round to kill my buzz? Absolutely not. So at this point, I'm like, I don't actually want the playoffs for this club. And I know that I'm going to get skewered for it, and I don't care.
Yeah. Let's on that note, then let's move into the Bill Manning press conference, because I think that is going to address a lot of what you're talking about, Jeff, and
Sure.
sort of, I think that we're getting into that sort of realm anyway. I think, what was it, Wednesday, Bill Manning held a press conference to address, obviously, first Bob Bradley being sacked in his role currently at TFC, and what sort of the new footballing sort of structure will be at Toronto FC, and also, of course, announcing Jason Hernandez as the full-time general manager, which I was actually surprised that they went ahead and announced that role right away.
Congratulations.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations to Jason Hernandez. A great guy. I've met him a couple times. I think you all have.
Yeah.
Really guy. Great guy. And obviously was here for the tail end of the treble and then retired and has been with the club ever since.
As a club ambassador, which
it was player relations.
What was his official title?
He was a player relations. Yeah, he worked on player relations. And then a couple of years ago ended up starting to be the assistant GM. Then under Ali Curtis, I think, before the end, and then obviously under Bob Bradley, but now takes the full job here. Mike, you were at the press conference. We heard your voice. You were asking questions of Bill Manning. Give us your sort of thoughts on the press conference itself, the vibe that was in the room. Some people were asking some very pointed questions of Bill Manning, and he had some interesting responses, but want to get your take.
Yeah, I mean, self-righteous, but I'm pat ourselves on the back because I think, you know, as media, we did a pretty good job at holding Bill kind of accountable and asking some really direct, straightforward questions. If it wasn't John, it would have been, you know,
you,
Gareth, or me, or, you know, everyone was going to get to those questions. So I'm happy that we did end up covering a lot of that ground. Yeah, listen, like, it's been the same message over and over and over, it feels like, out of Bill. And I have a lot of time for Bill Manning. I think he's very respectable, and I think he, like I've said on this show in the past, he is a very good executive. But I do feel like there are times where he kind of just says cliche terms and cliche phrases, as opposed to kind of, you know, like especially I think over the last 5 years, Toronto FC fans have become a lot smarter in terms of how they understand not just the game, but like MLS rules in general. And I feel like there's been a bit more transparency in that regard. And they're obviously like TFC fans they're super smart when it comes to just knowing what's up at the club. And I feel like there were times where Bill Manning would beat around the bush despite being asked straightforward questions. So I feel like from that perspective, he could have been a little bit more real, a little bit more authentic, I guess, if that makes sense. So I thought there were some instances of that. I could feel his passion coming through as well. When he says that he's never been more motivated. Yeah, you know what? Well, I believe you. At the same time, like that better be the case. Like, no, duh, I guess, based on
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
transpired at the club for the past little bit. And then obviously the one line I think a lot of people are going to talk about is when he was asked kind of the identity that he wants his football clubs to have, right? And of course, the question was based off the fact that they went from Chris Armas to we'll start with Greg Vanny, then Chris Armas, to a little bit of Javier Perez, to Bob Bradley, and all guys who were really, I guess, different coaching philosophies and coaching styles. So Bill Manning was his famous line, and now a lot of people are talking about it. He's like, people don't remember how football teams play. They are just remember that they win around that, I guess. And I think I think that's not true whatsoever. But yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, BS.
Okay. Before you get into your rant, because I can see you
Yeah.
ramping up,
Yeah.
let me just interject, because I don't want to do it when you get into your rant, because I know it's going to be delicious and I can't wait. You hit it, Mike. The time of too often now we have Bill Manning celebrating Toronto FC fans for being sophisticated. You often hear him say, how plugged in, how much of a football town it is, and then gaslight us for 45 minutes. Like you said, we don't care that you want that you feel passionately about fixing it. That should be the standard. It's lip service to say it out loud. And we've been dancing around the issue. Like, I think you guys did a tremendous job in terms of holding Bill's feet to the fire. But you already know it's not good enough for most of the pitchfork mob out there, right? Who want you to get up and throw apples at him or douse him in gasoline and light him on fire. There is a disconnect. The club, in some ways, is propagating that, because the dichotomy between blowing smoke up our asses and saying that we're smart, we're switched on, we're football aficionados, and then that press conference where you're dancing around the obvious answers is madness inducing. It really is, to the fan, to the reporter, to anybody in the association. It's, without looking for a better expression, it's an insult to our intelligence. And I think that came through loud and clear. And that's my only real comment about the press conference, because it didn't, it was a whole lot of nothing. It was, and at the end of the day, that's why the quotes that, was about to launch Mike into his rant are getting bandied around. No one cares about a tactical identity, is because the real questions didn't get answered, and it leads more credence to what I said last week, which is, I don't think Bill Manning is the guy that fixes this club, because when pressed, it's the same old, same old. You need a fresh voice, a new perspective. And the last thing it needs to be is tied to somebody's own ego. Like, I'm doing this to right my own wrongs. That can be part of the equation, but it can't be the whole thing. So I found a lot to dislike about that press conference. And Mike, please, Rant, cannot wait.
No, so look, as a lot of people know, I've been a supporter of this club for a very long time, and I have never been to a point where I have been close to walking away from it, and I'm very close now. And I think I think the issue for me, the thing that really bugs me about this current TFC team and the way that it operates is there's sort of just a lot of lip service being paid. And I really don't think there is a connection between the fan base and the club at the moment in terms of, what are you about as a club? And I'm not just talking about on the pitch as well. That's part of it, of course. And maybe I'll get into that, and then I'll get on to some of the other stuff, because this ties back to what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast around protesting and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
On the pitch, You for and this is not a this season problem. This goes back to the end of 2020, right? When we get bounced, even before we get bounced out of the playoffs by Nashville, when we go to Philadelphia and we lose 6-0, and just get absolutely like you saw the beginnings of the crumbling then. And this is a team that was trying at that point to battle for the Shield. Okay. And of course, we were happy at that point. We wanted the Shield. We wanted to try to win another trophy. But to me, there was a underlying something's not right. Something needs to change here. And in a lot of ways, we have been led poorly from a management perspective. Like, we have been led poorly. It goes back to how Greg Vanney was handled, how that whole situation was handled. Regardless of, okay, I get it. You have a GM, you've hired that GM, you want that GM to have the player decisions in terms of how the club gets built. I get that. You have to come to some kind of accord to work with Greg Vanney in that case. And the fact that you didn't come to an accord on that is a failure. It's a failure. There's no doubt about it. Because if you find some kind of accord with Greg Vanney, he is still manager of Toronto FC to this day. I can guarantee it. And then, okay, fine. Greg Vanney leaves. You go on a coaching search. You let Ali Curtis hire the manager. You get Chris Armas, and everyone knew. Everyone knew. Like, it wasn't fans kind of saw this guy. Like, everyone knew. Anybody who knew anything about MLS, anybody who was talking MLS, anybody who was within MLS, although they very much like Chris Armas, he is a very nice person. And obviously not being able to play home games in Toronto in front of fans and get to know them hindered him. Everyone knew this was not the right hire. Everyone knew. And you still backed it. You still went ahead with it. And of course, it turned into a disaster, right? Then you go off and, all right, you got to find another manager. Now, I'm actually not going to blame him that much for Bob Bradley, because at that point, he's kind of the only logical choice, right? Like, he is a high cachet manager. He obviously has the league cred, right? That's what we were all asking for at the time. But then you bring him in to be the manager and to rebuild and reset the culture. And before he even gets a chance to do that, you go and you sign Lorenzo Insigne and you blow a lot of the financial equity you have from the MLSE board on one player. And in all due respect to Lorenzo Insigne, he is a fantastic world-class footballer. But in MLS, you just can't do that. You cannot do that in the modern day MLS. You just can't, right? And what you end up doing is you bring him in, you bring Federico Bernardeschi in, and you build this plan around two players, and then you kind of give him skin and bones for the rest of it. I get it. The board maybe pulled some money. I understand that. But essentially, you sort of gave him it's like giving somebody a stone and saying, I'm going to give you the flint to light the fire, but it will be down the road. Well, I'm going to get cold and I'm going to die before you give me the flint. Like, that's ridiculous. Right. And to me, it is a lack of understanding that a long-term real plan needs to be built around this club to determine, how do we recruit players? What are the type of players that are Toronto FC players? We don't know. We don't have no clue other than, okay, they're a big name from Europe. That's not good enough. It's not good enough. I'm sorry, it isn't. Like, if you look around MLS, if you look around this league, forget the rest of the world right now, because you play in MLS, okay? I don't care what's happening in the Premier League. I don't care what's happening in Serie A. I don't care what's happening. Like, think about MLS. What is happening right now? The teams that are coming in and kicking your ass every week. Because this team is a soft push right now. This team is soft. It loses games. It's soft. It loses a goal, and you see the shoulders slump. It's soft, right? And you've got two DPs that are supposed to come in and raise the level of everyone else, and they have failed to do that. Okay,
and maybe the softest.
Well, look. I mean, look. In the end of the day, body language says a lot. Okay, I get it. That's part of their game. It's a part of how players from that part of the world express themselves on the pitch. I don't have a problem with that, except for the fact that here in this culture, in this footballing culture, okay, it looks shitty. it does it rubs people off the wrong way. And whether that's fair or not, I get people will argue that may not be fair, things like that. It is what it is, right? And from that perspective, I don't think that Toronto FC has thought about this from a footballing perspective. It's thought about it from a marketing perspective. It's thought about it from a how do we make an impact in the market? And I get that. DPs need to do that, or else why are you spending the money? But at the same time, there was no cohesive plan on how to build this squad outside of let's sign these guys who won the Euros and let's see what happens. And that is not good enough from a footballing perspective. It just simply isn't. So that's the on pitch issues that I really have with this club. And I think Bill Manning is the culprit behind this. Yep. Here's the second thing. The second part of this is this club's relationship with his fans right now, and its most hardcore fans, is maybe, aside from obviously people who work day to day with the supporters, I think they're great. But I think from a higher level perspective, I think there is a lot of, we'll stroke your ego, we'll say some nice things, but in the end of the day, we'll say, hey, safe standing's coming, then safe standing's not coming. Then it's, we're going to make a plan, but then the plan doesn't come. Right now, you're asking supporter groups to make plans around what does safe standing look like, and then all of a sudden it's it's like we'll put it off again. Right? Like these sort of things that keep coming up for the betterment of the fan experience. Like even around the stadium, I sometimes I leave the south end. I go walk around the stadium just to see what is the vibe other parts of the stadium. Like people come casually, and sometimes I hate that word casual, but I'm going to use it in this particular.
Yeah. We forgive you. Absolutely.
Yeah, but like you go around the stadium and like some of the facilities and some of the things that are being done are just not good. They're just not good enough. Right. And that's what I'm talking about when you're talking about, do you really value your fans in that way? And it really bugs me that you're asking fans to pay more because, look, you signed 2 really big players. I get that. You're going to try to recoup some money back. That's fine. Obviously, the pandemic put a hit into the business. That's another thing. You didn't have games for almost over a year. I get that too. But then compound that with the fact that you've put a bad team on the field. You've made bad decisions from a footballing perspective. And then on top of that, some things in the stadium are just substandard from that. That's how you lose people in the marketplace. That's how people may come and they'll show up obviously for a good time. But man, it just drags on people. It drags on people who should unconditionally love this club, but sometimes it's fucking hard. Like, I'm sorry to swear, but it is really hard to love this club sometimes because of the decisions that are made. And I do hold that at the president's feet. And that may not be fair. And I get that. And I've met Bill before and we've chatted. Like you said, Mike, he's a lovely person and a very good executive. I'm not saying that he isn't a good executive, but there have been bad decisions made at that level. And you can only lay that at the president's feet. Now, of course, other people are making decisions. We'll see how Jason Hernandez now does as the general manager. Okay. We'll see what he's going to be able to do. I don't know what he's got to work with, frankly. Like, I don't know how that's going to go. But I think right now there is a general sort of, like you said, Jeff, something has to change. And I know the DPs brought that up from a management perspective, from a coaching perspective, but I'm talking beyond that. I am talking beyond that. Something needs to change. And right now, again, I'm not even talking about winning on the pitch. Winning on the pitch sometimes is out of your control in some ways. I'm talking about an overall culture reset, rethink strategy on what Toronto FC is. What are we about? And what is that vision? Because I've talked to a lot of different people from a lot of different teams in the league, and they're clear on what that is. And I have no idea what it is here right now. And a Rant.
You want to go first, Mikey Singh?
I'll just say it really is unbelievable just how far this club has fallen. And when you look back at like the past couple of years since 2019, let's call it, because we'll give them credit. They made the playoffs. They went on that pretty special run,
magical
to the final. They followed that up with, well, Mike, you're probably right. There was some cracks there. They still had Pozuelo with having an MVP season. They still were literally a game away from winning the Supporter Shield, that they bottled down the end, towards the end of it. But from that point on, there's been a lot of poor decisions that have been made from a roster perspective, from a sporting perspective. And one of the things, obviously, that Bill Manning started off his press conference saying that he's going to restructure the entire sporting department. Well, yeah, guess what? That's because you have to, because you fired the guy that you hired to restructure the department in general.
Hmm.
Like that week, great, they have a GM in place, and I have a lot of time for Jason Hernandez. They're behind. If you peel the curtain back, and something that a lot of people don't get to see, there's not much else there because that department is so gutted.
A
And
lot of people left. A lot of
a
people left after the pandemic. Like
a lot of
the
people
Hmm.
are
brain,
still going to leave, by
yeah.
the
Well,
way.
you think
We
about it.
haven't heard
The brain
we
drain.
haven't heard
Sorry,
all
Mike.
of
Just
it.
to really quickly, part of also this
Hmm.
rant, it speaks to the culture of the club. That brain drain that left after Tim Bezbachenko left, and a lot of those
Yep.
guys followed him to Columbus, right? And you
Okay.
haven't been
To
able.
interject here,
Mhm.
they were. It's not like they weren't romanced away by more responsibility and more money, right? A successful team often gets gutted. We just won the treble. Bez left. All other MLS teams are going to drive trucks of money to his support staff
For
in an
sure.
attempt to woo them away, right? So
For
that's
sure, and
just me. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But I think in a lot of ways, it you a lot of those people left after Tim left. You're talking about the Corey Rays. You're talking about some other
Hmm.
people that are sort of behind the scenes that aren't as well known. But that speaks to the deterioration of that culture and the inability to rebuild it again. Sorry, Mike. That's sort of
No,
just a
I,
really
I
point I
I
want
think
to bring
I
up.
think you're spot on. I think you're spot on. And what I'll say again, I'm not sure if you caught it or not, but I don't think this is the end of the departures that you'll be hearing from the club. Um, so yeah, you want to use the word culture issue. It's a bit of a buzzword, but there is definitely a culture issue, I think, at Toronto FC, from everything that I've heard. And obviously that gets set from the top down. So that just adds to your point there, Mike, about kind of what's gone wrong at Toronto FC over these past couple of years. So listen, there's a window now in front of the club, and we've heard a lot of the same messages that we've heard a year ago, and same messages we've heard 2 years ago. We'll see who wants to be here, and whoever doesn't want to be here will move on from them. Along those lines, we've heard that line so many times. When is it going to get to the point where there's an environment now where people want to be in? Because Toronto FC was that place for
Yep.
a very long time in Major
Hmm.
League Soccer. They built that up, but I think it's actually gotten to the point where we can definitively say I think all of that goodwill now is gone.
Is
It's
way
gone.
gone.
It's flipped completely. You look at the Athletic article where random players are saying it's the worst environment I've ever been in. Who
We
knows if
Yeah,
that's
don't put too
sour
much weight into
grapes
that.
or yeah, but it's still there. It's still there out in the ether, right? And
Yeah, I think it's out in the ether. I
where
think
there's smoke, there's fire.
yeah, and I think the thing that the club needs to safeguard against is becoming what the club was when, say, Justin Morrow joined in 2013, in late
Oh, we're
2013
there.
under a trade, where it's like, holy crap, I'm being traded to Toronto. My career might be over. Right? Like that's
I
what
think we're
Toronto
there.
FC was at that time. Was basically I come to this club and my career might be in jeopardy because how
Hmm.
badly this club was run. And I
Yep.
think my concern and my frankly a little panic comes from the fact that we've been there before. I know what that looks like. In sort of cracks of that are coming back. You can see it. It's there. And
Oh yeah.
we're not
It's in our
completely there
muscle
yet.
memory.
I'm
Yeah.
not completely there yet, but if you don't start nipping this in the bud now, you become that very quickly and you start to become a perennial loser in this league. And I'm
Hmm.
not talking about just wins and losses. I'm talking about the way that you are perceived in the league and in football. And that goes beyond just on the pitch, right? It goes from trying to hire
100%.
executives to go to do the best work that they can, both from a business side and a footballing side, right? Like that's how TFC was able to do that. Now that was some of the charisma, magic, mischief of Tim Lewicki that got us to that point. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of luck of finding Tim Bezbachenko and sort of gambling on Greg Vanney when Greg was like, look, when Greg Vanney was hired as manager, no one wanted Greg Vanney as manager, right? Like
0%.
I remember
0.
that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I get some of that is going to be luck, but at the same time, you know, at that time there was a structure being built. There was a philosophy on what this club was going to be. It got accelerated by the fact you get a Sebastian Javinko and Josie Altidore, right? Like that can accelerate things for sure.
And it
But
wasn't enough. We needed a Victor Vasquez.
No, but you even before then you needed to go and get a Drew Moore, and you need to get a Stephen Beitashour, and you needed to get a
100%.
Will Johnson at the time, right? Like you needed to get those kind of players. I'm not saying that you need to go back and build it the same way now, because I think that's part of the problem with this year's build.
Yeah, MLS is a totally different animal.
That build and saying let's just replicate that. And the fact is, the league has so moved on from that, where you have to take that DP money, and again, it doesn't count against the cap. I understand it to a certain extent. But you need to take that overall budget spend that Bob Bradley was talking about a lot, right? That had been stretched thin by using that on higher end talent and being front loaded, and diversify that a little bit amongst your 23 or your 20, your senior 20. Because right now the team is too top loaded. It's been top loaded for a long time. Like this isn't a new phenomenon either, right? This club has been traditionally top loaded. And I don't know if you can continue to operate like that in MLS. And I think that you get exposed by teams who don't quite work that way, but find a way to be overall better. And you know who's actually starting to do that pretty well? RSL, the team we just played this weekend, are starting to build a team that, okay, you don't have a standout, you know, as again a Sebastian Javinko, a Miguel Almiron type player, exactly.
Miguel Almiron,
but you're relatively MLS solid throughout let's say your first 15 players. TFC is not that right now. It is nowhere close to that, and I don't know how it gets close to that right now because there's so many potential cap issues right now. I don't know how you get there. You know, other than to, like you said, Michael, last week, and you know, I disagreed with you at the time, but giving it some more thought over the week, I might agree with you. Maybe maybe you do need to tear this down to the studs and start again, which is going to be hard for TFC fans to hear, but that might be the way this team needs to go to really rebuild its identity. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I mean, we're dancing around the obvious answer, and that is Bill Manning's time at TFC is over in every possible respect. We don't believe him anymore.
It's
when
not,
he says,
right?
when I know, but this is my take on your rant and my own feelings. We don't believe him anymore. When he says the sky is blue, we're looking to check if it's orange, and that's very, very, very dangerous. You know, what you're complaining about on the fan perspective isn't unique to TFC. The problem is that the fans are exhausted. Bradley wasn't enough. We can call this club Band-Aid Football Club. The problem is that the issues cannot be fixed with a Band-Aid, especially if the person giving out the Band-Aids and deciding what deserves a Band-Aid is the guy responsible for a lot of these things at first. There's my rant. I'm now going to counter that. I don't think we're being fair enough to COVID when we talk about this. And I realize that we're all exhausted, and I realize that COVID is over. And I also realize that when I say, you know, when I play victim with TFC and our struggles over COVID, that anybody can step up and say every other team in MLS suffered through COVID. And they're right. I would counter by saying the Canadian club suffered more, but then you just get into a cyclical argument. But however, that being said, I do think, you know, to say that, and then Manning goes and Ali Curtis hires Chris Armas, and we all knew it was wrong, does eliminate a fact that there were exacerbating circumstances, and that exacerbating circumstances is COVID. We were, you know, it wasn't the most plum job to offer to somebody to replace our winningest coach ever, where we're not entirely sure where we're playing our home games. And so, you know, at the end of the day, the decision was made, and certainly you got to hold their feet over the fire for decisions that were made. So while I am allowing for the margin of COVID. I'm not at all kneecapping your argument. I just think it's important to allow for that margin when we're discussing, because you both flagged 2020 as when it started to go downhill. And of course, 2020 is an important year because the whole world went off the rails, right? I still stand by my point. I think it went off the rails in 2020. I think, switching the Beta Shores for the Gregory Vanderveels was the first in a long line of mistakes. And then I think, 2019, we were all so happy about that MLS Cup run, but we rolled it back like the Leafs are trying to do without a succession plan for a long, long, long time, way too long. And now we're seeing the result of that. But I'll close with this. It's funny to me that the two biggest recent failures in TFC land are Ali Curtis, who came with that big binder, that turned out to be false and chicken scratch in it, and Bill Manning's so-called 5-year plan that he touted with the acquisition of Lorenzo and Singh. How is that a 5-year plan? You bet the house on this guy, and either it was going to work spectacularly or it was going to unfortunately fail spectacularly. So, I 5-year plan sounds great and it's a wonderful turn of phrase, but how the hell do you sell anybody on a 5-year plan when so much of it, 90% of it, is tied up into the presumed success or failure of step 1 of the plan? You're not even getting to step 3 profit, right? Like the term 5-year plan boggles the mind. So again, circle back to the fact that for better or worse, fair or unfair, Bill Manning is not the guy that's going to fix this club. And I realize what Mike's saying, and I understand the reality of it, but we are grinding metal until that happens, because the guy that's going to repair this damage is not going to do it with Band-Aids. It requires fresh thinking, an entirely new perspective, and I just don't think the powers that be are capable of it, for whatever reasons, fair or not. And that's just the reality of the situation. We're dancing around the maypole here.
I think Bill Manning is capable, but he's gotten too many chances to get it right.
That's also
a
fair.
lot of
That's
people,
a bit more
people
judicious
don't get that many chances.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about what's next. And obviously, Jason Hernandez is the guy that's being named general manager. He was assistant general manager, so he got the promotion. Not surprised about that whatsoever. I think we touched on it last week that he was going to be the guy that's going to be controlling TFC, for lack of a better word, throughout this transfer window. So well-earned promotion for Jason Hernandez. Yeah, Mike already touched on it. Very well-liked guy, very smart guy as well. A guy who's kind of put in the work and learned from a lot of guys who have had success in this league. So
yeah,
I'm excited to see, I guess,
about it.
What his vision is for this club and how different it is maybe from his predecessor in Bob Bradley, and kind of, this window is going to be really interesting. I think one of the things that we can kind of, I guess, touch on a little bit is Richie Laryea, right?
Mm-hmm.
The update that we got over the weekend was that TFC and Jason Hernandez and Bill Manning still in contact with Richie Laryea, still in negotiations with Richie Laryea, even though his loan deal has expired and he's returned to Nottingham Forest. He's obviously with Canada at the Gold Cup, but they're still hoping to land Richie Laryea. Now, this is what I've been hearing. I've been hearing that in order to get Richie Laryea, it would be a permanent transfer, because that's what Nottingham Forest would like. Obviously, there would be a small transfer fee that would come with that. Obviously, Nottingham would like to recoup the $1 million that they paid to TFC for Laryea a year and a half ago. But with the idea of a permanent transfer means that you also have to renegotiate personal terms with Richie Laryea. And for anybody who's watched TFC, and even as Jason Hernandez has said, Richie Laryea has been TFC's best player this season.
Yep.
So when he looks across and he sees Jonathan Osorio making 1.4, he sees Insigne making whatever it is that he's making, Bernadeschi making whatever it is that he's making, Richie Laryea is thinking to himself, I've not only been this team's best player, but also maybe the best right back in Major League Soccer this season. I'm 28 years old. I'm in my prime. There might not be a better chance for me to get money here. So he's going to want better better personal terms. Now, you have to also factor in that if TFC do end up paying a transfer fee for Richie Laryea's services, that gets tacked on to his cap
Yep.
hit, right? So if they pay $1 million, they sign him to a 4-year contract. That's an extra 250,000 additional to his contract. Right now, Richie Laryea is making just shy of 1.3 million. A DP threshold is 1.6 million. So
Oh,
even
yeah.
if Richie Laryea was going to get, let's say, a $200,000 rate or pay increase, you give him that, plus you pay Nottingham Forest $1 million. It's a 4-year deal, hypothetically, or a 5-year deal. You're looking at essentially DP territory for Richie Laryea.
100%.
And that's what TFC is battling with. So I actually think the reason why this deal is going to break down is not because Richie Laryea wasn't willing to come back to Toronto, but I think it's rather because I think TFC just can't really afford to pay Richie Laryea that amount unless they want to make him a designated player.
And do you make Richie Laryea a designated player, right? Like that becomes the whole question of,
another thing.
Should you make him a designated player? Jonathan Osorio is a designated player right now, and people are up in arms about that. Whether it was communicated to fans properly or not, that's a whole other debate.
Hey, if you listen to this pod, you'll know.
Yeah, we've been saying it since the beginning.
He's been a DP since almost the beginning. But, in the end of the day, yeah, that's a tough one for TFC. And look, I don't think you can right now make him a DP. You're clearly, unless
we've outgrown the DP label.
Well, I think, unless a Saudi team comes and bails you out with one of the two Italians, essentially, that's kind of it.
Yeah, you're effed. 100%.
So then the next part of this is that should Richie Laryea decide to walk, then it does open up some cap space for TFC this summer. And I know that TFC have been they've been weighing their options. And obviously that one big option is going to be a prominent number 9. TFC want to bring in a number 9. They trust that Kobe Franklin there at right back. Plus you also have Jaquil Marcheretti that can cover that position as well. You have Raul Petretta, obviously at left back. Behind them, you got Christian Gutierrez, Themi Antonoglu. So you have a bit of depth there. Maybe the right back isn't what you need to be spending. You already have the highest paid left back in Major League Soccer. Maybe you don't need the highest paid right back as well in Major League Soccer. It's just this is what they have to think about, right? And instead invest those resources elsewhere into making maybe TFC a better goal scoring team, which is, Richie Laryea is great going forward. He creates a lot of actions, but you can probably get someone that creates a little bit more tangible production out of the number 9 position. So something to keep an eye on.
Crisis. Yep.
I think if TFC do end up walking away from Richie Laryea, Richie ends up walking away from TFC, which again, I think that's the route it's going to take, barring Richie Laryea coming around and reducing maybe his ask. And just to clarify, I'm not saying Richie's asking for DP money, but you add in his cap hit, it's DP money.
He's at the threshold because MLS is MLS.
Exactly. So instead of that, I think TFC, if Richie does walk, I think TFC brings in a striker this window.
Do you think Richie goes to another MLS club, or do you think he goes back to Europe?
No, I think he'll go back to Europe.
Yeah,
thank God, because get a loan deal. It would suck to play against him based upon our mismanagement of resources, and MLS being MLS. That would really stink.
Transfer window opens up when? Wednesday, I think. The summer window opens Wednesday.
Nice.
On the 5th. So Mike Singh will have all the dates for you throughout the next couple of weeks as we go into the summer window. Probably will not be as juicy as last summer window, but because that seemed to be like every other day there was something going on. But we will see Jason Hernandez walking right into it with a summer window. Let's get on a bit more of a positive vibe, guys. I know it's been down for the last sort of half an hour. Let's get into the burning question and let's give away some nice stuff. So let's
baby's first giveaway.
The burning question presented by Nesker, the neighborhood network, and the official community app of Toronto FC. Nearly 1 in 5 GTA households use Nesker to connect with their neighbors, local businesses, and groups nearby, like Nexker's Toronto FC fan group, where you can find our burning question posted each week. To join, download the Nextdoor app or go to nextdoor.ca. Now, before we reread this week's question, we got a little wrap up to do from last week's burning question. We've got our contest where we are going to be giving away a 2023 Federico Bernardeschi home kit, thanks to our friends at Nextdoor Canada. Thank you to all of you who followed, liked, retweeted, and joined the Toronto FC fan group on Nextdoor to get an extra ballot. I really appreciate it. And we got a lot of ballots. So really excited about that. But without further ado, we're going to pick the winner. So I think we got some nice put up. So let's pick a winner.
Let's go.
Okay.
Frank. Let's go,
Congratulations,
Frank.
Frank Leclerc. I think he's actually commented in some of our stuff in the Nextdoor Facebook, or it's already the Nextdoor group, TFC group. So Frank, thanks so much for entering a ballot. I think he's both on Twitter and on our TFC fan group on Nextdoor. So we'll be reaching out to you shortly about getting that jersey out to you. So congratulations, and stay tuned over the next couple of weeks because we've got some more. We got some more contests to sort of do through all our channels. So stay tuned for that. Now, getting
congratulations,
into this
Frank.
week's absolutely congratulations, Frank. This week's burning question: how would you rate Terry Dunfield's first match as Toronto FC manager? I guess interim manager would be the correct term. A couple of answers here, guys, and then we kind of got onto it at the start of the show, but maybe we'll get into it a little bit deeper quickly here. Matt on our Nextdoor group just says Fede's rocking some serious Jimenez vibes. I'm assuming he's meaning it's a Jesus Jimenez vibes. And with Insigne out, I'm not sure what more Terry can do. One match isn't enough to really evaluate. Interested to see how he does after 4 matches. And Todd, also in the TFC fan group on Nextdoor, says the construction of this roster is so bad, it's laughable. No one spends that much money on a DP winger, let alone 2. Manning and Bradley have failed miserably. Of the current roster, the only players that are guaranteed a spot are Johnson and Hedges, and probably Richie Laryea, but of course he's not the team right now. Dunfield is in a no-win situation. He's losing our best player in Laryea. Injuries are ridiculous, and talented depth is non-existent. I really don't expect much. And there was a lot of some of that sentiment.
Tell us how you really feel, Todd.
Yeah, exactly. On Twitter, Luca just says made good substitutions and the team played with more attacking intent. Just need to finish our chances. I think he meant more attacking intent in the second half. Get it a 7 out of 10. And Tertz McGurt's, old friend of the show. I liked how we looked going forward, especially in the second half. More chances than I remember us making all year. We didn't look as solid defensively, but I will say it was a good debut and the first game that was exciting to attend in a long time. Guys, look, I think it is, of course, impossible really to sort of rate Terry in one game. Mike, you said you felt it was a little bit more of the same. I thought the substitutions. I liked the substitutions. One, because there were actually substitutions, and Bob Bradley was allergic to substitutions. But I like the fact that, look, he went in there and he kind of went for the game, which is okay. And he really went to that bench and he sort of trusted in those guys to do it. And look, whether you agree if the talent is good enough, you gotta see what you've got. Really see what you've got and put those players in those positions in games like this. Not when you're down 4-0 and the game's kind of over, but in a 0-0 where you might have a home win there. And I thought it brought some life to the game, despite kind of how RSL was playing. But love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree. I mean, to me, Bob. Oh, sorry. Did I just jump?
Yeah, no. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was doing so good this whole episode, and then I muff it up in the last 15 minutes. No, Mike, you talk. I want to keep my record going.
Yeah, I mean, I said what I said. Like, it's tough for a guy who had 4 days to really come in and implement a complete new philosophy and new coaching style and new style of play. Football is also football, where you're always going to see a lot of the same patterns, regardless of who's on the touchline. So yeah, I mean, it was a solid debut from Terry. Like RSL is a good team. Um, I thought, especially in that first half, I thought Lorenzo Insigne and Raul Petretta had really started to form a really solid relationship down that left hand side. And in the second half, he made some adjustments. The game opened up a little bit, yeah. Both teams were going for it, and again, yeah, it's tough because I still feel like a lot of it was the same, but I don't really expect much different after just 4 days.
Yeah, yeah. I got to echo what my esteemed co-hosts are saying. It's an impossible situation. I think he tried to do right by the DPs by letting them play in their preferred position. I think he did right by the fan base by going 4-4-2. I think I was happy. I was happy. I'm excited to see what Terry does. He certainly knows the kids better than anybody. The guys that we're now depending on as our depth. So it's going to be fun to see what he can coax out of them.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people are rooting for Terry Dunfield. Whether this works or not, I think there's a lot. I think a lot of people have a lot of time for him.
Yeah,
And I think that's a great
Yeah.
thing. And let's see, right? Because I thought that it was bold to go with a 4-4-2. I don't think you necessarily start Kosi in that sort of secondary withdrawn striker role. I think you could do that with Federico or Lorenzo. We'll see how that goes tomorrow. But I loved him being bold. I love him putting Lazar Stefanovic in. I love the idea.
Yeah.
And look, yes, okay, the goal gets conceded at the end, but I thought he played well. I think you with his extensive knowledge of the youth system and the players that have come through, I think he can instill some confidence in them in terms of going in there at a senior level and saying, you can play here. I know you can play here. I've trusted you in these positions before. And I think that can go a long way. So, again, I think it was an okay first game. We'll see how things get. It gets considerably tougher with Orlando tomorrow. In Orlando on the 4th of July, a place that Toronto FC traditionally have not done so great at.
What is our record at Explorer? I know it's not as bad as, say, Houston or
no, we've
Gillette,
won a couple of times, but that when we've won down there,
we beat
was
Club
during the glory
Leon.
years.
I mean, we'll always have that Club Leon defeat at Exploria Stadium, right?
Two things I really want to see. One, we got to see Alonso Coelho start. That kid is so good and so talented. And you saw it right away. He's a legitimate difference maker when he's on the pitch. No one on TFC has the skill set that he has, aside from maybe a Victor Vasquez. But obviously, we haven't really seen much of Victor Vasquez this season. So I need to see Alonso Coelho start because I think he's good enough. He could be TFC's best midfielder, quite frankly. Maybe alongside Jonathan Osorio as well. And then the second thing, I'd love to. We need to get Bernardeschi in a more advanced role and in better positions on the pitch. Whether that's down the right flank, whether that's through the middle, you need to get him the ball. I think higher up the pitch for him to kind of make some things happen. And obviously, there's gonna be advantages at times. You want to get him in those positions where there are overloads and take advantage of all of those. But I think it starts with just the fundamental of finding ways to start him higher up the pitch. If that means maybe starting DeAndre Kerr down the right-hand side or Jaquil Merceretti down the right-hand side and pushing Bernardeschi up to that secondary striker role, then I think that's just the way that's what needs to be done. But those two things I think I really need to see.
Yeah, I agree with the secondary striker role. I think that might be the way you go. But we will see tomorrow night in Orlando. Let's wrap up the show there, gentlemen. Thank you for listening to another episode. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Before we do, just one thing on TFC's next coach.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, scoops.
So I think it's out there already, but just to reiterate for anyone listening, one of the questions that I was asking Bill Manning at the press conference is about TFC's budget. And I was asking why they don't have a third DP, and he kind of beat around the bush. He's just like, that's just what we budgeted for. And And then I asked him how much of a budget, I guess, or does TFC have the budget to go after like a high profile coach? And again, you can listen to the response. It's not really much of a response. So I think it's become quite clear that now that TFC is also paying Bob Bradley's salary and the fact that they don't really have money to go out and get a real DP, TFC are also don't have money to go out and get a high profile coach. So anybody hoping for an established big name, you're going to be let down. They're going to try and find and uncover the next hidden gem. And the reason being is
worked
because
before.
it's cheap.
Yeah, well, but it also worked.
Sure, you can point to that always. But when you have Insigne and Bernadeschi, I don't think your first choice is ever going to be get a really inexperienced.
Oh, no, it's a disaster waiting to happen. I mean, we can all see
we'll see what happens
right ahead on the horizon. Yeah.
Maybe if they could, like you said, work before, they can hopefully, works for other clubs. They can hopefully hit on something, but you have to understand that the next manager is also going to need to get the respect of those two Italian players. Yeah, because obviously they're guys who have a lot of sway and a lot of pull within.
Does Berna's dad have his coaching badges? Because he could come in for cheap, and I think that may be the answer. We should hire Bernadeschi's dad to be the next TFC.
I'll say this, and I know there's going to be some people out where I live that are going to hate me saying this.
No, you're not pulling the Bobby ass, are you?
Well, I'm just saying there is a guy that coaches over here. Just out my window here. If you're looking for somebody who can build a culture, that's a guy who can build a culture. Now, here's the thing.
I don't think he
never
wants
leave Forge for this place.
Yeah, I don't.
Like, why would he ever do that?
It's a poison chalice, but to ruin his whole reputation, as the guy that brought Sigma into the pros with this Franken squad of misfit toys, I wouldn't want it either. If I had that much, my whole credibility coasting on this move.
I'll say maybe it ends up being Terry.
Maybe it ends up being.
I hope it does. That would be such a great story. Why can't it be Terry? Yeah.
We'll see over the next 3 games.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toronto Till I Die. We'll be back next week recapping TFC's 4th of July clash with Orlando and their first ever match against top of the West expansion side, St. Louis City.
Thank you. I knew you were going to do that.
You got to yell it out now because it's all in
St.
caps.
Louis City!
Yeah,
exactly.
Remember to check out the new Toronto Till I Die YouTube channel at youtube.com/@TTID podcast. Hit the bell for notifications, and this will ensure that you're not missing any of the new episodes of the show. For Michael Singh and for Jeffrey P. Nesker, I'm Mike Newell. Cheers, all. See you next week.
And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.